Okay, shall we begin? Let's send Sarah a note. Okay, so I think we're running. If anyone has any issues hearing us, feel free to send that in the chat or as a question. So I'll go through a little bit. Thanks, Sarah, for the intro on both myself and Chris. The flow of today, I'll just give a brief introduction to AMS and our history with Syskoplan Reply having an AMS organization. Talk a little bit about the main topic for today, which is kind of the pros cons of having an offshore versus an onshore AMS partner, as well as some alternatives to one or the other. And I'll hand it over to Chris. Chris can talk a little bit about his own and Noramco's personal journey through AMS, how they evolved and how they ended up eventually coming back onshore from an offshore environment. Talk a little bit more detail about our specific offering, and then we'll open up to Q&A after that. So I think, Sarah, can you give me just a thumbs up if the advancing is working? Let me just check with her real quick.
It's moved for me, Matt. You're on the About Me slide.
Okay, I wasn't sure if I was doing that or if she was doing that. So, okay, so again, Sarah, thanks for the intro. Just a little bit more about myself. My personal experience, I've been in SAP the past 20 years, in and out of consulting and corporate environments, so I've been on both sides. I worked with SAP for quite a while, more so on the consulting side than the corporate side, but my entire career has been in post-implementation support. Certainly I've been involved with plenty of projects along the way, but I've always specialized in AMS. My personal background is not just managing support. I also actively engage in support. From an SAP perspective, I'm quite wide in all logistics modules, but my special expertise area would be sales and distribution, logistics execution, EDI, things of that nature. But as support goes, you know, I find every day I'm running into something new and getting into new areas. Some of my responsibilities with AMS, of course, managing the team day-to-day operations, managing resources, since we have a blended model. I'll go into more of that later. But each resource on our team is dedicated to several clients. So making sure, you know, that balance is happening, managing projects for small projects that we have come in, of course, managing the relationship with the clients, sales activities, pre-sales activities, and then again, you know, getting in and getting my hands dirty myself and taking tickets when I can, outside of the other pieces. Just some personal things there. That's my family down there in the corner. I have 3 boys, and then that's me in the office where Sarah is today. I'm not there today, but when I am, that's usually where I'm sitting. Okay, so a little background on AMS at Syskoplan Reply. So as Sarah mentioned, the company has roots going back to 2003, 2002 and beyond. Originally started more on the project consulting side, so upgrades, mergers, acquisitions, those sorts of things. And with that, in each case, the project consultants, you know, they'd spend 12 to 18 months with people And then they'd go on to their next project. And of course, the people that they got to know and build those relationships would continue to contact them ad hoc for support, essentially. So we always supported our customers, post implementation, but was not formalized into its own practice until 2011, which is when I was brought in to help build out that organization. Taking calls at nights and on weekends and at lunch breaks is just not sustainable over a long period of time. So, after about 5-10 years, that's when we started a formal AMS organization. Of course, this past year, we formerly were Enowa. We switched over to Syskoplan Reply, joining the Reply network, and essentially the service stays the same. Activities we engage in, typical incident resolution, of course, although I'll talk more about that later on how we differ there. Our service is a shared resource model. It's named and dedicated resources. So, when a client joins us, they have resources named that are dedicated to their account. And while they may have several accounts they service, they will always be getting those same people, unless there's special coverage reasons, holidays, vacations. And then, of course, if we have a special expertise, so, a special expertise area, somebody comes in to do something very specific. Languages, everyone speaks fluent English, of course, I should say. German, Spanish, French, Portuguese, Chinese, we have lots of language coverage within the team. And then covering typically North America, South America, or Latin America, European hours and Asian hours for certain periods. Okay. You'll have to give me a moment. There's a bit of delay. Here we go. Okay, just back up one. I'll go through this. I'm not going to touch on this, but this is just an idea of the range of industries we cover. We from our background, going back to the history of the company, we were always very specialized in chemicals and pharmaceuticals, process industries, but we do branch out into several different areas across the manufacturing landscape, but also services, retail, automotive. This is just a sampling of some of the customers and industries we service, and as we've grown over the years, this certainly is not an exhaustive list. Okay, so offshore analysis. So what are the benefits of offshore? Of course, there are benefits, otherwise no one would do it, right? So a lot of companies that go to an offshore support group, of course, the number one reason, first of all, is either you don't have the size of team in-house to cover all of your issues, or simply expanding the expertise. So you have a smaller team that knows, certain modules, et cetera. You want to expand into a larger footprint, and then also saving costs, right? Sometimes with cost-cutting activities, we see jobs going offshore for support tasks. So the primary benefit, I think, as everyone recognizes, is cost. Saving money sort of per hour for support tasks. We'll talk a little bit why that doesn't always work out the way it seems. Repeatable tasks, level 1 tasks. So things like password resets, job monitoring, restarting jobs. Those sorts of things that maybe occupy time, take away from the internal resources. They have projects they're working on, they have other vendors they're managing. They don't want to be bogged down with these other tasks, considered low-level tasks. And then off-hours coverage. Of course, having a group in a different time zone is beneficial if you have a 24/7 environment and you need support overnight. Your onshore people don't need, your in-house people do not need to be on call or taking calls overnight if there's an emergency, or in cases where you have job monitoring happening. Jobs are usually running at night. If they're failing, you can have an offshore resource restart those jobs for you. And incongruent holidays, right? So holidays tend to be mismatched. If you are running a 24/7 environment, you have U.S. holiday that your company is off for, the main people, but maybe you still have manufacturing running, you still have shipping and receiving, and then you have people in other regions that can support those days. And all of these are wonderful reasons, of course, to choose offshore, but there's caveats with all of them, and I'll get into that as we go. Okay, so challenges. What are the challenges? Well, some of the biggest ones I have here on this first slide. So operating schedule. Of course, like I said, if you have somebody monitoring jobs overnight, that's great. But for working with those people, there tends to be a very limited window, right? If you're talking about people in the EMEA region, of course, if it's Asia Pacific, it's almost non-existent crossover. But in the EMEA region, you may have a couple hours where you can really engage with these people that are offshore, and unless they're structuring their hours to mirror your own business hours, typically 8 to 5, 9 to 6 in the U.S., which is usually not the case, you're not going to have that time to really dive into issues in detail, or with your users, getting them on calls together with the offshore resource. I think one of the other things, as I mentioned, the holidays, it's convenient to have somebody covering holidays for you, where you don't have to take that away from your own team. However, what we find in the U.S., for better or worse, is that we tend to have less holidays than most other countries. And so what you find is when you go to an offshore environment, they actually have more holidays. They may not have coverage on holidays, or if they do, they will charge higher rates. So even though it's a standard business working day for the U.S., you have people filling in on their holidays in another country, and now you have to pay higher rates because they're covering you on a holiday. And in addition to that, what we tend to find is with holiday coverage, it's rare in the U.S. that you really need it. Usually the main users that are dealing with SAP issues day to day tend to be, people in the offices, and they're not working on those days anyway. Resourcing. So one of the biggest things, of course, is non-dedicated resources and high turnover rates. So usually it's sort of a black box scenario, as I like to call it. So you have a ticket, you send it over to your support partner who is offshore. You have somebody pick that up. They don't know anything about you. They don't know your company. They may not even know how to log into your company. So it seems like every time you're sending over a ticket, you're starting over, right? You're sending over a ticket, somebody's coming in new, they got to learn your environment, they got to learn who you are. And there's a lot of wasted time building up that person's knowledge just on who you are and how your system's configured. And then high turnover rates. There's a lot of, in certain areas, there's lots of different companies that do this offshore support work. They tend to move around to get salary increases. Makes sense, of course, but the issue with that is that you're not seeing those people. Once you start to get somebody up to speed, they're gone because they're going to another company or another client. And then with that is the level of expertise. What we see with the level of expertise is, in general, it tends to be that the people that are joining these offshore engagements are newer to SAP. They're using it as a way to build up their skill set. So they're kind of more in tune for level 1 type tasks. But when it comes to level 2, level 3 type issues, or really true consulting basis, they just don't have that experience yet to be able to provide that level of service. So if you're sending something that's, maybe takes an hour or two to resolve, or it's highly repeatable, not too complex, those issues tend to be okay for that service. But if you're looking at something where you're really looking for advice, how do we do something, that tends to not gel with that service. One of the other things we see is we find that these companies will start off certainly in the sales cycle. They'll put in their best resources to help attract customers, or they only use them for the sales cycle or for the first few weeks, first few months, and then they roll off to help attract some other companies, new business. So what you see is that you see that trend go down as more juniors come in over time. And just from our experience, our customers get frustrated with that. Next. I think I skipped one. Okay, so a couple more challenges. Of course, communication. And, of course, there's language barriers such as accents, not having, fluent English speakers, English as a second language, any language as a second language. There's always going to be, just you're at a detriment there, right? It's different having someone who's native speaking English versus someone who uses it as a second language. Even if they are fluent or fairly fluent, excuse me, and accents are a challenge sometimes for understanding, but also intent and meaning. And this is one that a lot of people fail to recognize, is that even though you're communicating and you feel like, okay, I can understand them, I can understand what they're saying, they can understand me, they can speak English well enough, the intent behind the meaning may be completely different. So the understanding is different. And you go to explain an issue, you think you're on the same page, you break away, and then you come back, a day later and you find out, oh, wait, we were on 2 separate pages. And then just connected services. This continues to get better over time. I mean, especially now, with the pandemic, the past few years, I think structurally speaking, video conferencing, things of this nature has gotten better, but we do still see instances where poor connections, unable to get a hold of people in other countries just because of the framework and the infrastructure is just not up to par. Cultural differences. So I talked about this a little bit already. I think one of the big things is certain cultures, they have an inability to challenge just because the way they view kind of the employer-employee customer relationship, it's, they're looking for a very specific set of directions. And a lot of times our clients are not looking for that, right? They're looking for more of a consulting environment. Different ways of working, workflow, obviously that's all different. You're going to find that all over the place, but those can be challenges that are sometimes not thought about. And then finally, compliance. Certainly if you have someone who is out of country, certain regulations in the US, ITAR compliance, for example, you just can't it doesn't go together, right? You can't have someone in a foreign country working on your system, or if you do, they're severely restricted in what they can do and what they can see, and ultimately that just makes things harder, especially if you're going through new configuration or development, and you need to test those things. If your offshore resources are not allowed to see any of your data, that makes it really difficult to test. And as well, even if you don't have things such as ITAR, special security clearances, just knowing the rules, right? The domestic tax laws, domestic laws in terms of, other regulatory bodies such as the FDA, the DEA, chemical regulations, all of those things. You're losing that sort of knowledge when you're going offshore. I wrote security and privacy concerns as well. I mentioned that not necessarily because it may be less secure to go to an offshore environment, but if there is a security breach, they're beholden to their own local laws. So they may not necessarily need to disclose that to you if they had some sort of breach in their own backend systems where your data was exposed. So those are other concerns to take into account. Okay, onshore. So what are the benefits of going onshore? Well, of course, kind of the opposite of everything I just said, right? That goes without saying. However, there are certain key differentiators, again, that most people fail to recognize, which is easier access to the resources, having the same time zones, of course, quicker response times. If you send something in off of standard business hours for an offshore, they may not see it till the next day. Better customer service, just the language barrier alone leads to better customer service. The different cultural differences, as I mentioned, the ability to walk through issues together on the phone together. I mean, that just makes a big difference. Training opportunities, on-site visits. So if you're dealing with people with less experience, they're not going to be able as well to train users up on new processes and things. On-site visits, it's hard to have somebody fly overseas to come on site and visit your site if that's something you need for a special occasion, whether it is on-site training, whether it's more of a focused issue resolution session. You have some things that are taking longer to get done. It's a lot easier to bring a domestic resource on site, meet your team, meet your people, see your facilities. And the cost savings gap isn't as wide as it once was. As this sort of offshore model has been around for quite a while now. I mean, 20, 30 years at least. It's getting the cost savings gaps are becoming less. Okay, so does that mean you need to have all or nothing? No, of course not. A blended support model is also an option. So what we find is for certain companies, especially larger ones and certain industries where you do have a 24/7 manufacturing environment, it makes sense to have an offshore for those lower level tasks, and then having an onshore environment for more complex tasks. You can have both. It's a matter of sizing it and making sure it's sized correctly. But I think this keeps you from paying higher rates for an onshore, quote unquote, more expensive resource to do something like a password reset, and you can keep them focused on other tasks, as well as if you need, they can be an intermediary for your offshore as well. What kind of things do we see the offshore resources best suited for? Again, of course, the level 1 issues, I keep harping on that. Things that are 100% directed. So they don't require any consulting expertise. It's, here's what I need you to do, go do it. Okay, they go do it. And things that can be completed with less interaction. ABAP development is one. However, again, as long as there's not that consulting component, you have a very clear functional specification, technical specification says exactly what to do, send that off. That's work that can be taken in and then done without a lot of interaction until you come back to the revision phase, the testing phase. And of course, overnight support as well. Okay, so I think what we'll do is we'll get back into more specifically about how we handle these things when we go. But before we do that, I'll turn it over to Chris. Chris, thank you for joining this with us. And Chris can talk a little bit about Noramco and how they came from an offshore back to an onshore.
Great, thanks, Matt. So just to give you a little background on myself, my name is Chris Cooper. I've been with Noramco for over 20 years in varying roles. I am currently the applications manager. So to give you a little history about our company, founded in 1979, Noramco is the leader in specialty active pharmaceutical ingredients development and manufacturing. We have facilities, R&D and production facilities in Delaware and Georgia in the US, some facilities in Neuhausen, and then we have access to agricultural operations in Tasmania through an affiliate. Currently, we're running SAP ECC 6 Enhancement Pack 4. So yes, we know we're kind of behind the times. Approximately 180 users. And our functional scope is basically everything. We, procurement, sales, marketing, finance, production, QC, QA activities. So let me tell you a little bit how we ended up with an offshore company. We were previously owned by a Fortune 500 company. Back in 2015, 2016-ish, we were divested by that Fortune 500 company. And being part of the Fortune 500 company, most of our applications, if not all, were housed and supported through that Fortune 500 company, right? So we needed to stand up all these applications on our own, which included SAP, our training application, our compliance and deviation event tracking. And so we went with an offshore company that said they could help us during that divestiture and with ongoing support, right? And so that's how we ended up with the offshore company, because they could supposedly help and support all of our applications. So it was kind of like a one-stop shop. But then we got into it and we had some problems. So Matt, if you want to go to the next slide, I'll talk about the challenges we encountered. First off is the GMP concerns. We are a highly regulated industry, not only by OSHA, but the FDA and DEA as well. We have certain criteria that we have to meet, certain reports, and certain ways we have to do business to stay in regulation with those agencies. And we found that a couple of the vendors, that in a couple of the applications that offshore vendor was supporting, they were making changes directly into our production environment. Now that's a strict no-no for us. We must go through dev and then a QA or test environment to make sure everything is tested and that all documentation is complete and done before we move anything into production. We had a lot of issues with the offshore company, and that was pretty much the final straw that led to us looking elsewhere when that instance happened. But some of the other challenges were the time zone. We'd be exchanging emails throughout the day, and due to their time zone, they were sleeping as we're working. And so for some issues, that's okay, right? If it's not a high priority issue, that's okay. We send an email out when they get to work. After we're gone, they work on the issue and then they kind of send it back to us, so it's there for us the next morning, right? And that's fine for a lot of issues, but there are issues where hey, something's broke right now, and we need it fixed right now to continue. We are a 24/7 operation, 364 days a year. We do take off for Christmas, but otherwise we're running in. So if there's an issue with our SAP, we can't charge our manufacturing reactors, right? Because it's all run through SAP. So the time zone became a problem. As Matt mentioned earlier, the holidays, more so the companies, the foreign companies' holidays, they would be off. And it's not a holiday for us here in the U.S. So we're trying to perform business as usual, and the support on those days was very poor for us. We would generally have a phone number to contact in emergencies, and that the person who would be answering that phone, I would say 7 out of 10 times wasn't the actual person that could help us. So they're basically taking a message or trying to understand our problem, so that they understand who to contact to get us help and support. And so it was a very lengthy process, and usually we didn't really get that much help on that given day. Dedicated resources. So at the time we were paying for dedicated resources for these applications, and what we found was, if we weren't taking up their time every day, all of a sudden we would ask for something, a week from now, and the resource the dedicated resource that we're supposedly paying for really was working on other things for other companies as well. So that led to delays in us getting service for this dedicated resource. New knowledge. Some of the coming off of being part of a global Fortune 500 company, when we got divested, we were limited to how we could do certain things in our applications. And since we came out of that, we wanted to change some things that were tailored just for our company and the way we did business. And what we found was that some of the vendors for our offshore company, they often only seem to know one way to do something. And we said, hey, that really doesn't work for us because of the way we do business, and we want to change how it's set up. There were times where they really couldn't help us. They just said, oh, this is the way to do it. This is the best way, the really only way to do it. And, obviously we knew in some cases that just wasn't true, but that's the way they knew how to do it, or that's the way it had already been configured when they got it. Another issue was turnover. There was a fair amount of turnover with the offshore company. And worse than that, it seemed like the new person to replace the old person didn't have the same knowledge and experience as the person we were working with previously, right? So as we moved through and people left, we got it would appear to me is less and less knowledge base and world experience than the people before them. So that became a real problem. As Matt mentioned earlier, the phone receptions, again, this was several years ago, but if we're on a call and the connection was bad, and then we're dealing with someone whose first language may not be English on top of that. And again, I know everybody's first language is not English, but that can be difficult to understand, and especially if you're over a very spotty phone connection, it can become, could slow business down quite a bit at that point. And then finally, in cases we would have to have a go-between, right? We'd be on calls, and the person doing the actual work or had the actual knowledge may not be proficient in English. So we'd have to have a third party from the vendors group on the phone and basically translating between the two groups. And so that, that became a little bit problematic because, we're not sure that the explanation we're getting back is really the way it's working, or the explanation going back to the person who didn't really speak English. We're truly understanding the problem we were having, or the issue we were trying to resolve. So, so for that, again, the biggest one for us, and it ended up looking for different options, were the GMP concerns. When they didn't truly understand that, for us was a big problem. And I'll give you an example of timing. We were paying for dedicated resources through the offshore company, and the storage location, relatively simple to configure in SAP, took multiple weeks. I want to say it was 3 weeks, and which is just really an obscene amount of time. And here recently, we had the folks at rASE do a storage location, and I think it was completed in 2 days, right? And that's 2 days, and that's not a dedicated resource to us, right? That's just, we call it, we put a ticket in through our ticketing system that goes to them. Their folks get the ticketing, review the tickets, and they send it to someone. So, 2 days in dev, tested, and turned over to us for testing and QA, right? Versus 3 weeks from our dedicated resource from the offshore. So,
yeah, and not 2 days billable time, of course, right? Either.
No. It was just turned around in 2 days, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I better not have paid 2 days for that, Matt. Anyway. Yeah.
No,
I mean,
certainly not.
It was the storage locations is just an example of a really simple thing that we get turned around very quickly now with non-dedicated resources versus a say dedicated resource that took 3 weeks, and just insane. So. I think that's about all I have, Matt.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Appreciate that. And yeah, I mean, I think to that point, of course, emergency issues will be turned around, based on priority level. They'll be turned around if I mean, typically you don't need a storage location on an hour's notice, but if you did for whatever reason, of course, that would be supported. But I think what we find, just to tie up, kind of what Chris was saying a little bit, and what I had elaborated on earlier, is that even though you have these quote unquote cost savings, what happens is you're finding that it's taking longer to get issues resolved for a myriad of reasons, right? Off hours, lack of expertise, et cetera. And then also just the time to do those things. So the bill, while you may be charged a lower rate, it may be taking 8 hours or 16 hours to get something done that maybe would take 2 to 4 hours for an onshore resource. So ultimately, you're paying more. Okay. Okay, so I'll go, maybe I'll just focus on this slide for now. So AMS is the common term within the industry. We refer to our service as application support and enhancements, and really in casual conversation, as you'll find, myself and others on the team, we just refer to it as remote consulting, because that's essentially what it is, right? You're getting resources that are at a project level in terms of expertise and industry experience, if you will, that for whatever reason, they don't want to travel 4 days a week, and they don't want to be on long engagements. They prefer to have constantly new challenges coming in. And that's what our team is made up of, right? It's consultants who can do that consulting piece. As Chris mentioned, when you have a and offshore that, if you give them a very directed reason to do something, there may be a consulting part that's lacking there. And I think back to taking over for one of our clients, and we came in and we actually had some crossover time with the outgoing support group, and they were in the process of creating 10 new company codes. And when we asked why that was, the response was, well, that's what they asked us to do. And the person that asked them to do that was a staff accountant who had no understanding of what that meant. So, these are the kind of cases where you really, sometimes you're configuring these things, they can't be backed out again, right? You don't want someone that can't bring that consulting knowledge. As I said, we're a shared resource model. So the people, our consultants that are on a given account will have a couple accounts that they work at a time. That's to help bring the costs down, so you're not paying for them full time, which wouldn't make sense, of course. But they are dedicated. So the people that you speak to through the sales period, the people that go through the onboarding exercises with you, those are the same people. I think Chris can probably attest to the fact that we've had the same people working on his account for years now. We have very low turnover, and we don't switch people around. Of course, if there's a need to bring in somebody for special expertise, we will do that. But day to day, it's the same people. We get to know your business. We get to know your culture. We'll come out and do on-site visits. We'll do plant tours, if we need to come in to do training, but also just to see your operations. And these are things that differ from a lot of other offerings. I think another thing to place here is that 80%, when we look across all of our clients company-wide, 80% of our tickets are related to enhancements and change requests. We work with a lot of mature environments. Of course, we take over support work from projects that we've implemented. But in each of those cases, most of the kind of traditional break-fix work is either handled in-house, or there may be a blended model with an offshore group. But a lot of what we're doing is, interface development, bank implementation, small enhancements to configuration, forms, EDI, all of these things that are really enhancements and change requests. A lot of the incidents that we tend to have are, as Chris mentioned, the emergencies, right? So, hey, I have a truck waiting at the door. This guy's getting ready to leave with our stuff, and we can't process the delivery and the shipment in our system. We can't get the proper documents to print out. We need help, like right now. Those are the kinds of things that we're doing. Or maybe month end for finance. Hey, we're trying to process month end. We're 3 days into the calendar, new calendar month. We need to get this stuff closed, and then we jump in right away to help with those things. But a lot of it is really adding new functionality to the system, new reports, etc. Like I said, on-site visits, we offer all those sorts of things, trial tickets and test periods. Try us out if you're not convinced. We'll certainly do some time and material based tickets. You can get a feeling of how we operate. And then service augmentation. We operate on monthly retainers. We try to size that correctly. That's really based around resource management, so we can properly manage resources. If not all hours are used in a given month, they roll over to the following month, etc. That time can be taken and placed against a separate statement of work, a separate project, if it's unused at the end of the calendar year, for example. And we adjust the model as we go. If we're finding that you're consistently under or over hours, we have a conversation about it, we adjust that. And also special needs. We had a customer several years back got flooded out with one of the hurricanes, and they couldn't operate for several weeks. So okay, we adjust that. We cater to that. And of course, the pandemic, certain industries were hit very hard. We had an automotive customer that wanted to reduce their contract by 75% for a period of, I think, 5 or 6 months. And of course, you know, that wasn't an issue. So anything we can do to help the customers, we really look at it as a relationship and a partnership as opposed to, you know, a black box service. And I think that's probably good enough. I'm certainly, you know, available to go into any detail if anybody has any specific questions offline. You know, I think, Sarah, you'll share my email address. People can contact me directly as well.
So while they're advancing the slides, this is Chris from Noramco again. I will say that they've been very fair with us with making changes to hours as needed, and rolling over unused time to the next month and using for bigger projects the time that we haven't used that monthly allotted time in previous months. So they've been more than fair with us using those hours.
Yeah, and Chris, you know, I mean, you guys the past few years have had really big projects, right? Where there's been divestitures, et cetera, and you know, those
Splitting
projects
companies.
have primarily been completed by the support consultants, the people that, you know, that know your environment. So
Correct.
Thank you so much, Chris and Matt. I do have one question. We have time for one question, and then there's a couple more, but we'll follow up individually. And then if you need to drop off, my email address is on the bottom right, and I can also provide Matt's email address as well if you want to contact him personally. But the first question that I did have was, how does this service differ from other onshore offerings from companies such as Deloitte and Accenture or even SAP? I think that's a question for you, Matt.
Sure. Yeah. And it's something I hear a lot, right? So, you know, a lot of, first of all, I think our size sort of company is sort of missed a lot anyway, right? But I think you have that same environment, right? So the Deloittes, the Accentures of the world, they're large, they have large support organizations. They tend to use those support organizations as training grounds for people that they eventually want to send out into the field. We don't do that at all, right? But again, you don't have the named dedicated resources. So it's the black box scenario. You send over a ticket, you know, maybe you don't hear anything for 2 days. They come back to you. In SAP's case, right? You submit an OSS message. You might get a response 2-3 days later, and they say, "Hey, got your ticket here. Who are you? How do I log into your system? Please send me the secure credentials." You know, I think that if you're going to subscribe to that sort of service, you may as well go offshore, right? Because now you're just paying more for the same sort of service in terms of customer service, response times, et cetera. You know, with us, I think what you'll find, and Chris can probably confirm, is, you know, hey, it's Lisa. Oh, I have this issue. Lisa helped me with this last week. Let me call her again. You know, and you get on the phone with her right away. So it's that custom tailored service that you're getting, and people that know your environment and know your system.
Yeah, this is Chris again from Noramco. So speaking to that, Matt, you know, we have a ticketing system that goes to Enowa, and we open tickets for minor issues, right? We open them for emergencies and for tracking purposes. But when I have an emergency issue, there's, you know, 4 or 5 phone numbers, cell phone numbers, and emails that I have for the folks at rASE, right? If I have a warehouse issue, I know I'm calling Matt. If I have a finance issue, I know Lisa, I'm calling Lisa. And my business folks have worked with these same people over the years, right? So we're not waiting for some anonymous guy to call me back and ask me what's the issue, right? We're calling directly to the folks that already know our system, know our individual strengths and weakness as a business, or as the employee in that department, because we do have some people with some weaknesses that will call with some, you know, pretty simple things that they should know how to fix by now, but they don't. But if it's finance, and Lisa is the person who deals with our finance, she knows that right away. She's like, okay, so Sam is calling from Noramco. Sam has a little bit of issues with these simple things, so let's check those first and before we do anything else, right? So it's that personal knowledge and availability that we really like about the company.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for your participation. Thank you, Matt and Chris, as well, for speaking today. And again, if you have any additional questions, I did drop Matt's email into the chat box. My email is in there as well. And we look forward to seeing you on our next webinar. And this concludes today's webinar. Thank you so much, everyone.